walking 200 miles around the southwest footpath might be enough of a challenge for you in 1 year. But not for my next guest. He did that as a warm-up to climbing Mount Kilimanjaro the same year. And he's also, while he was trekking around the coast path, decided he might write a book about it, which has just come out. And the book's called From the Cliffs of Cornwall to Kilimanjaro, The Trekker's Tale. And Eric Marks, who lives in Plymouth, is here to tell us more about it. Evening to you, Eric.
Good evening, Tiffany.
Evening. Good to speak to you. You sound like someone with a lot of energy.
Well, I suppose for my age, I've got to say I'm bouncing with it.
Are we allowed to know your age?
Certainly. I've just entered my 80th year.
Wow, you don't sound it at all. You were in the Royal Marines, so do you think that kind of has always made you kind of willing to take on challenges?
I think so, yes. I think there's like an overhang there, but although I left in 1969, actually.
But did you keep on kind of going out and being adventurous, though?
I did. I had, through that time, I had various dogs, mainly Labradors, and you can imagine, they kept me active.
Yes, completely. So there you were. You made this decision with your nephew, didn't you, that you were going to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, and as a bit of a way of preparing for that, you were going to trek along the southwest coast path. And while you were doing that, I think you had the idea, didn't you, that you might write a book as well, as if you didn't have enough to do.
It came upon me almost imperceptibly. You're getting experience after experience after experience. And then I thought, wow, this is interesting stuff. People would probably find this quite interesting to read. And then the idea of the book was born.
And have you ever written a book before?
No, I haven't, no.
So there was just something about this particular experience of yours that made you think others would, well, of course, why wouldn't they want to know? It's far easier to read someone else's experience of it than doing it themselves, isn't it? You were 76 when you were walking the coast path. I mean, that is a challenge in itself.
Yes, yeah. Although I've been walking the coast path, getting on for nearly 50 years now, sort of day walking and backpacking, and I just live for it. It's wonderful, wonderful.
And do you have any favourite parts of it? I mean, we know you're from Devon, but we're in Cornwall, so we don't mind. But are there particular areas you love in Cornwall?
Yeah, I was born in Cornwall actually, in Loo.
Oh, were you? Oh, so you haven't moved far, actually, then, in that case. But are there particular sections of the coast path that you just would walk, just because you love it?
Yes, and it's described as one of the most tricky ones, actually, in the southwest, and that's St. Ives to Penzance.
Oh, right. Okay, but what stunning scenery around there.
It's absolutely startling. Yes. Amazing, And when I first walked that, probably about 30 years ago, I thought, this was my epiphany, if you like. That really got me into backpacking. And this is just wonderful stuff. It just, completely absorbing.
And so, it was, if you don't mind me saying, quite late in life for you to decide to train to climb Mount Kilimanjaro as well.
Yeah, it was a bit of a con trick. I went to a dinner one evening here in Plymouth with my nephew Jonathan, my climbing buddy, and he bought me a glass of good quality wine, and then a second. I thought, well, this is most unusual for Jonathan. Something's happening here. Should have smelled a rat, actually. And then he started telling me about this upcoming adventure, this trip to Kilimanjaro. He was just retiring, actually, as the Detective Chief Inspector from the Mets. And he said, I just want to launch my retirement with something like this. Then he explained that he had tried all his possibles and probables looking for a climbing buddy, and they all had one excuse or another. And I think I was the last resort. He always denies that. But to me, I was the last resort. But after that wine, I accepted.
So it didn't take much for you to take up the challenge. So you clearly enjoyed your training around the southwest coast path. Do you think it did help you for when you eventually travelled to Africa for that second part of your journey?
Absolutely, yeah. Apart from the altitude, that's a different story altogether, the altitude effect. But muscles, joints, stamina, after all our multi-day trekking, on the coast path, everything was in great shape, absolutely great shape. And there were 5 of us in the group. My nephew Jonathan was 48 at that point. The other 3 were in their 30s. So I was the vintage one, no question about that, with a wide margin. But we all got along very well, and we all had, for that particular trip, we all seemed to have about that same level of fitness.
Wow, that's amazing. You are amazing, Eric. And did you write your diary then? Did you take a diary with you and or a journal to write down experiences just so you would remember them for your book?
Well, normally I'm a great note taker, a journal writer, but actually I didn't on that trip. But the experiences were so engraved in my mind, the recall was so easy. So I thought, okay, I've got enough here, I've got enough material to write that book.
And it has to be said, it wasn't all plain sailing for you. Obviously, we want people to buy the book and read your story, but you did have kind of some difficult moments, both, in the southwest and further afield, didn't you, on the journey?
Yes, we did, actually. It was more Jonathan who suffered on the southwest coast path with his Achilles tendon. He'd had trouble with that before, but during that trip from Minehead down, he had a couple of recurrences there. One of them was very unfortunate. We were just leaving St. Ives, going towards the last couple of days of our journey, and he was just ahead of me. I said to him, be careful, that we're going into a snaky area, plenty of adders down here. And it was that sort of day when you might expect to find them coiled up on the coast path, just up the sun. So I said, be very careful. Anyhow, he was ahead by about 20 yards and he suddenly screamed. I thought, oh my goodness, it's happened. So I ran down as fast as I could, expecting to find he'd been bitten. And in fact, what had happened, a small weasel had come out from the right-hand side of the path, fairly small, like a baby weasel. And he had to twist to avoid stamping on it as his foot went forward. You can imagine with walking boots, it's not a great thing.
Yes.
As he twisted, unfortunately, the weasel then went under his left boot and got crushed.
Oh, my goodness.
He was desperately upset the rest of the day, as I was as well. But in that twisting, he actually pulled the Achilles tendon, and we sort of went along. He was not finding it too easy. He was limping along. And when we got to St. Just later that day, he said, well, we'll see how it goes for tomorrow, but in the event we couldn't carry on the following day to Penzance. So that final day we had to miss. But I didn't actually have any difficulty. My difficulty came on Kilimanjaro.
Well, I've seen documentaries of people who've climbed it, and as you said, the altitude is something that people, doesn't matter how prepared they are, can really have an impact on them. And of course, the surfaces and the terrain is so different, isn't it? There as well, it can be quite difficult.
It's extremely difficult in places, especially the final couple of days. And we were on one of the 4 routes called the Mashami route, and we didn't know it at the time, but it's the steepest but the most scenic of the routes. The other problem with that is that Jonathan is very anti-camping. So we couldn't actually backpack down the coast path. We stayed at B&Bs and hostels. And that was a bit of a culture shock, the hostels to Jonathan. But
I'm sure.
Another story. But, that route involved camping all the way up and all the way down.
How did he cope?
He didn't realise that when he booked it. I was doing some of the accommodation booking, but he carried on with booking for the actual holiday itself. Well, expedition, really. And he was devastated to find it was camping, but he gritted his teeth and we got through it.
Oh my goodness! I just the thought that he didn't realise. Did he think there were going to be hotels or something along the route? Do you think?
Well, yeah. I mean, the problem with the Southwest Coast Path, from the point of view of accommodation, it's sometimes quite tricky to get accommodation neatly spaced out for a good day's walk. good day's backpacking, So it does become quite tricky at times. It's either going to be too long a day or too short. So this is why I find camping so much more amenable, because you don't have to book in anywhere. It's an awful lot cheaper these days.
Yes.
Not only that, but as long as you're fairly adept at picking out a campsite, you can get down through there with little trouble, even in bad weather. And that's another story, but we were lucky on that. We only had about 2 very, very light showers in the whole trip. But we had to do it in 3 sections because of Jonathan's commitment still finishing off in the police. So we did Minehead to Barnstable as phase 1, back to Plymouth. But a week or 2 later, we went back to Barnstable and then walked down to Newquay, back to Plymouth. And then the final stage, back to Newquay, and then around to Penzance was the plan, but of course, as I was explaining, we had to call a halt at St. Just, a day short of our actual goal there, our destination.
But I mean, that still was plenty when it came to the training aspect of it. And looking back at that time, are you delighted that you did take up that challenge?
Thoroughly in disbelief that I would have done something like that at my age, but it worked. It worked very well, and I think I've felt the benefit in the last 2.5, 3 years since then.
I'm sure. And what was that moment like for you all, as you said, within your group when you did, reach the final moment at Kilimanjaro?
Well, I didn't reach it. Let me explain. We got to the summit camp. And after a grueling day we had first of all got what's called the Barranco Wall, which is a great curtain of solidified lava. And you think, God, how could we climb up there? But in fact, there is like a diagonal route up, so you're not going up vertically. It would take a very experienced climber to do that anyhow. But nevertheless, even on the diagonal route, it was still quite a bit of scrambling, and 1 or 2 people in groups just ahead of us had to come back. They just couldn't take those heights, Although you are warned about it, you need to head for heights on our particular route, on the Mashali route. But anyhow, we got round that. A bit awe-inspiring. You're sort of clambering around great boulders coming out around the narrow path, and you've got a big drop behind you. But you've got the guides there telling you where to place your feet and your hands, and you just trust them and gradually edge yourself around, this sort of thing.
Goodness.
But I didn't mention, for the 5 of us in our group, we had 23 in the support group.
That's a huge amount.
The tents, the dining tents, all the water, food, everything. So it's a big undertaking.
And will we have to read the book then to find out why it was you didn't make it to the summit?
Preferably.
Yes.
I did a silly thing, and unfortunately, I'll tell you a bit about it anyhow. When we got to the end of this long trek of that day before the final ascent, now I must point out the ascent starts at midnight. And you go up in this pitch darkness, scrambling over rocks and over the sort of debris, very loose debris that you're walking on, and it's hell of a steep. And a lot of people, you read accounts of other people going up, and most people, it seems, find that a staggeringly difficult final climb. And all you can see is this cone of light from your headlamp and other people's headlamps, and you're going up in this darkness. Anyhow, when we got to this summit camp, they said, right, tea and biscuits laid on, come up, and then we've got a couple of hours before the evening meal. So we went up, had our tea and biscuits, went back to the tents, sort of sorted out the gear, ready for the summit trial, if you like, the ascent itself, and then we sort of rested for a little while. Then we had the call to the evening meal. Went up there. Then they were telling us all about what would happen, and what to take, what not to take. So they also warned us that it was a grueling 8 or 9 hours. So we knew what to expect, and we only had that short rest after a long, long trekking day anyhow, you know. So went back to the tent, and Jonathan, who hadn't been sleeping very well, was in his sleeping bag, and I could sense he was just beginning to fall asleep, and I heard him snoring very quietly. And I thought, right, I've got to be extremely quiet. I don't want to wake him up now and disturb him after all the sleepless nights he'd had. So I bent forward to take my boots off to get into my sleeping bag, and the altitude hit me big time, and I thought I was going to die. I could hardly breathe, so I lay back again for a couple of minutes, tried it again, it was just as bad. So I thought, oh, heavens. So I grabbed my mountain jacket, lay on top of the sleeping bag, pulled the jacket over me, and nodded off. What I didn't realise was that the inner door of the tent, which is like a double zip, was open for a couple of feet at the base of it, just by my back. And a great wind blew up outside, very, very, very cold, biting wind. And I was in this sort of sleep. And what had happened then, my kidneys got chilled, and I went into like a state of hypothermia. And then I suddenly woke up and didn't know where I was. Jonathan said, you're ill. Just at that same time, one of the group leaders came down from the dining tent and said, oh, come on, lads, it's about time you're up for the, a cup of cocoa before you go, this sort of thing. I just couldn't have made it. So Jonathan didn't feel very well himself, actually. So he explained to the guy that, it was better for us not, certainly in my case, not to go. Anyhow, eventually got into my sleeping bag and nodded off. At about midnight, I suddenly woke up and I felt this great compulsion to get out of the tent. And I didn't know why. It was something sort of calling me. I got outside and it was bitterly cold, but the wind had died away. And I looked up at the night sky. It was absolutely brilliant and unbelievably clear. And it sort of hit me right away that this was so unusual, this great spectacle, that it took what was left of my breath away. And I thought, I'm definitely going to die here. I just couldn't get any breath at all. And I sort of went into this delirium while still looking up at the night sky. And it gave me the impression that I was in sort of feeling distance of the meaning of life. If that's not, stretching it too far, that is actually what I felt. And
oh, my goodness.
That was a completely life-changing moment for me. And I thought, I don't care about the summit. This is something I wouldn't get up there, but you wouldn't get up there until daylight, So I thought, this is absolutely wonderful. And I just went back to the tent, knowing my mountain journey was over. And that was it. The following day, we all met up, and they came back from the summit. But the three who went up suffered enormously. The first one came back within the first hour and was bitterly upset. The young lady there, and she thought she'd let herself down and all the rest of it, which she hadn't. She did her very best. With the other two, one of them kept falling asleep as he was walking, and the other young lady with him, she was sick about every 10 minutes.
Oh, how terrible.
Yeah. In a way, we got away with it. We really did get away with it. But that experience under that night sky, I've never seen anything like that. The Milky Way in such clarity. And, the sky absolutely so full of stars, you think, well, is there any space between them? It was that jammed packed with stars.
So it was worth it for that alone then, really?
It was worth it. Worth every penny. Worth every ounce of effort.
Oh, well, you are remarkable, Eric. I could talk to you for much longer, but what we really want people to do is to buy your book. Is it very exciting to have this book out now?
Well, it's enormously exciting. And, after you've been writing it for a couple of years, then it goes to the editor and then the proofreader and all the rest of it, you think, it's a long haul.
Well, we wish you the very best of luck with it. It's called, as I mentioned, From the Cliffs of Cornwall to Kilimanjaro, The Trekker's Tale, and you are Eric Marks. And best of luck with it. You're fascinating to talk to. The book is, equally as fascinating as well. And really lovely to talk to you this evening.
Thank you very much, Tiffany. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Eric. That's Eric Marks. If you would like a copy of the book, I've been reading some of it as well. It's wonderful tales of those, around the southwest of course, as well, but as well as that trip to Kilimanjaro. But it's so interesting to hear Eric's story of it all.